Hello, and welcome to another episode of Northstar Talks Politics. Today, I am talking to you about an issue that caught my interest when I was in the general subject of censorship, which is becoming more and more of a problem in America. Of all things, censorship of the nation's finances, and there being secret committees that are apparently rewriting the government budget but not disclosing it, according to a former Housing and Urban Development Secretary under George Bush, who actually went on Tucker Carlson to discuss this of all things. And then I think it was John Oliver did a thing on that, or somebody, no, not yet, not John Oliver, different comedian did a thing on the Tucker Carlson piece, pointing out how they say a lot of good things, and then they say some utterly unhinged things about, oh, Christianity would be the cure of this. It's like, what the fuck? That's got nothing to do with it. But nonetheless, despite the right-wing bullshit, there is a real issue with censorship and the public not being given access to information. In this case, this is something that I'm extremely left-wing. For those who are new to my channel, by the way, I'm disabled on COVID. I'll get a little sidetracked at times. I apologize. But for those new to my channel, I am a democratic socialist. I'm very left-wing, but it's actually the Democrats who seem to be, as far as I can tell, the biggest offenders here, although it could just be people on the left expecting nothing better from the Republicans and focusing on them. This topic, why and how censorship thrives in American prisons. You'll see the role of the Democrats, more of this in why books are banned, censorship in prisons, these stories, some of the more recent stuff, censorship is part of slavery, so I see. But this article as well. It's kind of a long one, so bear with me. I'm going to read through. I'm going to comment. I'm going to pause the reading through at times to talk about things. First of all, I thought I will give you guys a little primer. The topic of structural and symbolic violence is going to come up repeatedly in this. Structural violence or systematic violence or systematic oppression, these are all terms that basically mean the same thing, is where the system oppresses people, makes it so they can't get resources, makes it so they can't get information, denies them access to the necessities of life, denies them access to books, education, literature, puts them in prison for excessively long sentences. This includes things like racial disparities. This includes things like economic disparities. This includes the criminalization of homelessness. This includes the mistreatment of the disabled. These things all fit under structural oppression or structural violence. This relates directly to the term symbolic violence, which is when this gets inside your head. So, for instance, I am disabled on COVID. I lived with a family member who eventually, after some time, the stress was too much, and they'd been through abuse themselves, and they became abusive towards me. And one of the many things that they did as part of their emotional abuse, because it was mainly emotional and verbal, with just a little physical sprinkle in. And I've talked with, like, I was no saint. I mean, like, sometimes I call names and yell back at the person who was yelling at me and calling me names or even hitting me. So, I mean, I didn't always respond at the same level, but some of the things that may not be okay, but it does not justify what was being done to me. But when it gets in your head is like where I start, this person would always call anything I cared about with politics and such crap. They would always use the word crap or shit, which is a demeaning, disrespectful term. Symbolic violence can be where I find myself using that term sometimes to describe my politics shit. Gets inside your head, you start using the terms of your oppressor. People, particularly of literary persuasion, have talked about the kind of the cop in your head, or the although it's not always cops doing this, or the abuser in your head, the force of oppression that gets inside your head. I took a whole class that focused partly on this, focused on how this relates to the medical system, how it relates to the treatment of the homeless, those in extreme poverty, the disabled. This is before I became disabled. It's become something that now, as a disabled person, I face a lot of. And there's overlap. There's people who advocate for, prisoner rights who also advocate for disability rights, because these are all tied together, because a lot of disabled people end up homeless because there aren't enough housing assistance programs, and SSI doesn't cover the rent anymore in most places. So you end up homeless. I could maybe get a 3-bed apartment that might be able to afford in in an area that's way out in the middle of nowhere. But then if, say, a roommate leaves unexpectedly and I can't cover it, I could end up evicted because they leave me hanging for rent that there's no way I can possibly afford. Then you get an eviction record, then you can't get apartments. It's complicated how it ends up. But no matter what you do, even if you try and do roommate contracts, and that's a very educated person thing that many people aren't even aware exists, you can end up homeless because you're disabled. Then you can end up criminalized because you're homeless. Then you can end up in prison. So there's a lot of overlap in advocacy. So this is something near and dear to my heart because of being disabled, and because of having been through that abuse situation, suffering that. But being emotionally abused. But anyways, why and how censorship thrives in American prisons by Kelly Jensen. October 21st, 2019. Yes, I know this is a bit older. Nothing has changed. In fact, all of these problems have gotten worse. And there are updated articles written in 2024 by the same author here. Prison Ban Books Week. Free prison tablets aren't actually free. Same author, 5 years later. So this is continuing. It's not like this is a one-off author. Anyways, how am I doing for time? 6 minutes. I better get going here. Censorship in prisons is the biggest First Amendment violation in America, yet it remains one of the least talked about and least examined. With prisons, we've created an opaque system. Until recently, not many people witnessed the day-to-day activities inside a prison. Soon, because of COVID, there was more scrutiny. And thus our perceptions have been guided by the most outlying vignettes. Fictional portrayals of prison life, like in Oz, I guess it's a TV series, or media coverage of riots and other violence. So when prison censors tell us that something is, quote, necessary to maintain security, it's easier to believe that security could be easily compromised and these guards have the expertise to assess the risk correctly. Actually, this might be a good place to touch on this. This is a shorter article and come back to it. Because this is shorter, but also this directly touches on this bit about what's necessary to maintain security. State prisons censor more books than schools and libraries combined. No, actually, no, it's this one. Okay, yeah, sorry. And this, which is a bit longer, but relates to it. I'll just do them in order. All right, anyways, with prisons, we create an opaque system. So in prison, censors tell us something that's necessary to maintain security. It's easier to believe security could be easily compromised, and these guards have the expertise to assess the risk correctly. Spoiler, they don't, said Michael DeLon, a representative of the Human Rights Defense Center. This is one of the main groups doing advocacy in this issue, and Books to Prisoners. Paul Wright, director of the Human Rights Defense Council, so higher up, same organization, is more direct about why there's such tremendous censorship in prisons. We live in a fascist police state where the control of the population through armed state violence is paramount, and that includes restricting the flow of ideas and writing and reading itself. I'm not sure I would agree with it, especially back in 2019, calling it fascist. People use that term too broadly. Authoritarian. All fascist regimes are authoritarian, not all authoritarian regimes are fascist. Fascist has an element of extreme racism, xenophobia, stuff like the white supremacy that Trump is doing his second term now would correlate with fascism. Trump 2.0, that's fascist. Trump 1.0, that was just authoritarian. And not even that successful. Project 2025 made him much more dangerous in his second term. But it's a state tending towards fascism and tending towards becoming a police state. It's just a bit of an exaggeration in what he said. But we live in a state that's tending towards becoming a fascist police state. And in the prison system, it operates in ways that are already indistinguishable from one. It is steadily increasing. Yep, that's true. And this mirrors society at large with the exponential expansion. It's not only getting worse faster every year, also true, literally and figuratively, of the police state and the surveillance state. And this ranges from the obvious, more cops, more prosecutors, more guards, more prisons, more jails, to the technological having, by the way, more prosecutors, not more court-mandated attorneys. I remember watching a John Oliver thing on how insanely overworked court attorneys are. So we're putting money into prosecution, not into defense. It's a joke, the free lawyers that people get. So it's not in any sense a fair system that people get if you don't have the money for a private attorney, which can be incredibly expensive. I remember dealing with one of those just for school issue once when someone was harassing me, and then when I told them they had to stop or I would report them, they made something up about me, so I couldn't accuse them, and I had to deal with that for a while. And even just briefly, a little for a very small number of hours, it was thousands of dollars. People rip you off, especially if you're in a vulnerable position, and um, even for a little advice. Anyways, the technological of having better, cheaper means to survey, control, even kill people. Yep, drones for one. The government collecting all your data, putting in backdoors so they can access your devices. Yeah, you do not live in a free country. If you imagine that, you're dreaming. And it's just the government doesn't always exercise its ability to absolutely control your life, but it does it whenever it feels like and not always for legitimate reasons. And under Trump, it's becoming more and more that for clearly illegitimate reasons. As part of Banned Books Week in 2019, PEN America drafted a policy paper that goes deep into the realities of censorship in American prisons. Also chose the topic because you see the worst trends in the US. You always see it in foreign imperialism, so what we do overseas, which always comes back to the country, and you'll find it in the country eventually, and what we do to prisoners. It's always the canary in the coal mine. It's becoming increasingly clear to us how widespread and systemic this problem is, and how the national trend is toward more restrictions on the right to read, not less. We wanted to try to help reorient the conversation towards the necessity of upholding the right to read and pushing back against these restrictions, says James Tager, Deputy Director of Free Expression Policy and Research at PEN America. This is left-wing think tanks. These never have nearly the money of right-wing think tanks because they're not funded by billionaires, usually. They're funded by small donations. It's pitiful how under-resourced they are compared to the right-wing stuff. Because billionaires want fascism. Any Marxist will tell you this. I'm a Marxist, democratic, socialist. Any one of us will tell you that fascism is capitalism at decay. Billionaires fund authoritarian movements and fascist movements when they feel their power might be threatened as conditions get worse for ordinary people, and there's a risk the ordinary people will rise up and demand better, roll back the way things got worse for them. To sort of hold on to the gains they made, the billionaires start going authoritarian so they can make further gains in terms of further oppressing labor, further cutting back government spending on things that don't enrich them. By the way, military spending enriches the billionaire class. They pay a fraction of the taxes support quote defense, which is really running an international empire. The international empire brings some economic returns back, but less than the cost. So you spend $100 billion, you get $50 billion in returns to the country. And so only half of it really has to be paid out of additional taxes in excess of what's coming back in various ways, increased tax revenues. So in terms of raising the tax rate, billionaires might be paying, for 10% of the outlying, the cost goes out. It would be 20% if half wasn't coming back. Let's say 10 to 20%. But where do the profits go from defense spending? 45% of the surplus value from defense spending. So the value in excess of raw material costs and such that goes either to wages or profits. That goes, it's the figure is it's about 55% of the value produced workers keep, 45% goes to owners. So let's say 40% goes to billionaires. So they, spend $1, they get $4 back in their stocks in the defense industry. They get rich, the country gets poor because it costs the country more than it brings in. And people get blown up in other countries. So billionaires will always support more defense spending. They will always support more police funding to increase their control over society and keep people oppressed and afraid and not able to rise up. And just look at how police have brutalized protesters. And if you actually do something wrong, God forbid, you will be thrown in to jail for as long as possible. It's part of a system of oppressing people, keeping them afraid, keeping them down. especially minorities, especially the poor. Anyways, the necessity of upholding the right to read, because books are being withheld from prisoners, if that wasn't clear here, pushing back against these restrictions. One of the reasons we felt so strongly about the need for this support is to highlight how this is an issue of access to literature, not just a prison reform issue. We want readers and writers across the country to get upset about this, and I do hope you get upset about this, viewers. Key findings include the reality that books about race and civil rights are among the most likely to be banned. Let that sink in. Books about race and civil rights are the ones that are being banned in the highest numbers. That there's no meaningful insight into what and how books are banned. This job is often relegated to the mailroom, and arbitrary decision making occurs therein. So there's no oversight of what gets banned, what doesn't, and this can also lead to corruption. It can lead to corrupt jail guards, bullying prisoners they don't like or taking bribes to let books through. Don't think this doesn't happen. This is part of, corrupt. They're not even cops. They're guards. And what content neutral bans, quote, content neutral are, as well as how being selective in the vendors from which incarcerated individuals can receive books further hinders access. PEN America notes that despite the fact those in prison can argue for their First Amendment rights, particularly when it comes to book bans and censorship, many do not because of the fear of retribution. Yeah, they try and speak up and they'll suddenly get thrown in solitary confinement for 6 months or 8 months. Or, yeah, this happens all the time. It's been ruled to be torture, even by courts in the U.S., but it continues to happen anyways. The prison administrations have just ignored court rulings that this is torture and a violation of human rights. And that was under Biden that they were doing this. John already did a thing about this. In fact, the Biden administration is one of the ones, and the Obama administration are two of the ones that made the prison system worse faster. Trump didn't actually have much room to make things much worse because Obama and Biden beat him to it. Although the Bush administration started this shit. It's been every president. Pretty much we've had nothing but shitbags since the 21st century rolled around. As more reports surface about the reality of prison censorship and more organizations, and by the way, in case it wasn't clear, I'm someone who would have liked to see Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, or even Andrew Yang, just someone a little more left wing. But I, in terms of who realistically could have immediately been president, but I will vote since in states where either where the election's going to go a certain way, or you live in a state that's not a swing state, you can just vote for your conscience. I will vote third parties because the two-party system is part of what's wrong with America. It's part of why that we never see any change. I mean, we have the Democratic Party, the same one that was behind Jim Crow laws, because Democrats used to be the party of racism, that was behind the Tammany Hall political machine in New York City, and an equally corrupt one in Chicago, and an equally corrupt one in Cleveland, that was behind the rigged 1944 Democratic Party convention that put Truman in and made him unelected president of the United States, because they knew FDR was dying, when the American people wanted Henry Wallace, who was much more left-wing than Truman. This is not to be mistaken for George Wallace, who was this right-wing scumbag. Different first names. The Democrats are ridiculously corrupt. In many ways, they're more corrupt than the Republicans. That said, right-wing ideology is a bunch of shit and does some really evil things, but they're internally consistent and they don't have to be corrupt because staying true to their principles allows them to just be vile in a very open way. The Democrats, instead, because their voters want good things for the country, they have to sell them out, be corrupt, lie, cheat, steal, because they are another party owned by the billionaires. There are two billionaire-owned parties, and there is no hope for change if we're stuck with that system. The only thing people can do is demand constitutional reform, demand proportional representation in the House, ranked choice voting in the Senate for president, expansion of the House, which was capped as a way to fuck with the allocation of political party seats, especially in states with very low populations, and more referendums so they can directly vote on issues. That's how you restore democracy in America, and it's probably not going to happen. That's why if I can legally do it, I want to get the hell of Sweden, Norway, Finland, get the Denmark, even France or Germany. I just want to get the hell out of the country because things are very bad here. And I know these countries aren't utopias. They're just a little better, but a little better then this can make an enormous difference. Even small changes can have small differences can have huge effects. As more reports surface about the reality of prison censorship and more organizations, nonprofits, newsrooms, legal and others, of course now the news is under attack as are nonprofits by Trump. That's why we saw like Colbert get fired and such, step forward to advocate on behalf of the populations behind bars. More, of course he was a comedian, but I mean, Trump sued Fox News in 60 Minutes of actual news stories, so it's very much like even the right isn't safe from this shit. Step forward to advocate on behalf of populations behind bars. More needs to be said and done about one of the biggest hindrances to change. Prison book donation policies across the U.S. vary by state, are inconsistent, and willfully create barriers that make even understanding the vastness of the problem incomprehensible. The lack of open reporting, of open access to banned books lists, because the lists of what books are banned are kept secret, which would not be happening if this was really, we actually need to ban the books, but there's good reasons. No, when you keep something secret, you keep it secret because you want to hide it from scrutiny. This is government overreach, this is authoritarianism, this is creeping fascism. Secret banned books lists. And the silence those inside the system as well as outside it, because those inside the system don't get a voice, and those outside it, even people get released from prison often, they don't get a chance to have their voice heard in the news, further harms the sensitive population who, as research continues to show, are less likely to experience recidivism, so they're less likely to commit another crime and go back to jail when given access to books while they're behind bars. So you give prisoners books, they're less likely to commit crimes when they get out. It saves taxpayers money. If it was really, it reduces violence in prisons. If this was really about an efficient legal justice system, you would be loading prisoners with books. You would be forcing them into the library and making them read as much as possible, because that would be what would be best. You want to take away their freedom? Well, then force them to read. Don't make it harder for them to read, which is what's actually happening. Don't take their access to books away. Reading is the best protection against violence and recidivism of anything in the U.S. justice system, which doesn't have nearly the resources to do the kind of rehab programs that really help, or like Finland's justice system, where they keep people not in like these giant behind bars places, but they put them in places that look kind of like houses, although there's still things like lack of access to sharp objects, and there's still barbed wire around the compounds, but they basically have houses, they have cars, they're actually in many cases allowed to leave the compound, though they have a tracker so that they have to wear. And like, this is murders even where they're doing this, but they make things as similar as possible in normal life, because studies showed that this greatly reduces recidivism, increases reintegration in society after people are released. It also increases the welfare, the happiness of the prisoners, and it actually reduces crime. People are less likely to offend in the first place. Partly probably because when you do what the U.S. justice system does, you get prison gangs that people are forced into, then they come out, then they create crime in the communities and actually cause more crime. People who had never committed crimes end up committing crimes because of the way the U.S. justice system is. It's not good for anyone. It's only good for the fascists, for the people who want people scared and afraid. This period, there's also problems with, in the U.S., former inmates having a very hard time getting jobs, getting housing. The whole system is fucked, and these people are marginalized, and there's stigma, and there's negative stereotypes, negative narratives, which are just based on fear-mongering and hatred. This period is one of the first times when these restrictions are being examined by a wide audience. This is during COVID. In other words, a lot of the conferred latitude has happened by simple lack of both internal and external oversight, says DeLon. Yeah, it didn't really change once oversight came in. Prison book censorship by state, or when people started talking about this, rather, which didn't happen until COVID. Letter including the book. Dear Books to Prisoners, that's the organization, a compilation of letters sent from incarcerated individuals to prison book donation organizations reads, "It's the only chance of hope to escape the madness prisons are known for. I am free as I chase word by word, page by page, 500, 1,000, even 2,000 pages are never enough. Policies and procedures vary, are inconsistent," which is a huge problem because You have national organizations, but state laws are wildly inconsistent and non-transparent. No accountability, no ability to even see what's going on. Each U.S. state operates their prisons independently, meaning that policies are about what they do and don't allow in the mail. Policies about what they do and don't allow in the mail for people who are incarcerated vary. By the way, it's not like red state's bad, blue state's good. There's a list later. Some of the worst states in the United States for this kind of censorship are blue states. Massachusetts, New York, Hawaii. Hawaii is a standout. It's one of the very worst states, and they're a blue state like all heck. It is Illinois. Some of the standouts for the most oppressive prison systems in terms of prison censorship in the United States are the bluest states. It's not a red state, blue state thing. In fact, if anything, Democrats are worse in this issue than Republicans, which is surprising, although I guess the Republicans are worse on forced labor in prisons, and the Democrats are worse on denying prisoners access to books. So they're shitty in different ways. The policies tend to be statewide, and as outlined in the PEN America report, prison officials... Oh yeah, by the way, it's not even just number of books. It's not like there's carefully curated lists. It's nanny state. No, Illinois, very blue state, in 1 year, 1 year allocated less than $10 for new books per prison in one of their fiscal years, which gets to later. So the blue states not only are heavily censoring the books more than the red states, they're putting less money into book availability. Of course, in the red states, a lot of the books that are available are like religious and self-help books, and there's propaganda in what they allow. But there's sometimes actually more books in certain red states than blue. It depends. I think Louisiana has very poor access to books, if I remember. Anyways, each U.S. state operates their prison systems independently, meaning the policies vary about what they do and don't allow in the mail for people who are incarcerated. The policies tend to be statewide, and as outlined in the PEN America report, prison officials generally have broad latitude to ban books based on their content, including the prerogative to develop their own rationales for why books should be blocked. They usually do so on one of several grounds: sexual content, nudity, or obscenity. Think about that for a second. So prisoners, if they're not juvenile system, are almost by definition adults. They're not even allowed sexual content. We're not even just talking like pornography. We're talking mild stuff in a passage of a book. So you're cutting off that whole access to a person. They're already not supposed to be doing anything sexual behind bars, so fine. But at least allow them their imagination. Allow them, we're talking mainstream New York Times bestsellers would be banned on this grounds. Depictions of violence or language perceived to encourage it. Depictions of violence are almost any book. You do a fantasy or a sci-fi, there's going to be violence, there's going to be wars that happen and stuff. Banned. Depictions of criminal activity or language perceived to encourage it. By the way, note the or, so it can just be a simple depiction of crime. Even if it's being condemned in the book, it doesn't matter. Depictions of escape or language perceived to encourage it. Encouragement of group disruption or anti-authority attitudes or actions. So even, civil disobedience, even Martin Luther King's writings on that, as if you should be retraining people to be nonviolent, to use their words, to engage in civil disobedience. That should not be being banned in prisons. Racial animus or language perceived to encourage hatred. That's totally fair to ban. As the report states, many of these guidelines are not inappropriate. The report may say that, but that's a load of shit. Some of these are wildly inappropriate. In fact, I'd say the majority. This, wildly inappropriate. This, at least the depictions part, the language perceived to encourage it, appropriate probably, but depictions, as if that's not part of the human experience, inappropriate. Encouragement of group disruption, no. The majority of these are inappropriate. They're pulling their punches when they wrote this back in 2019. Or rather, the report is, which isn't even by them. It's by, I think, PEN America, which is different from the people writing this article. And the Human Rights Defense Council did a lot of the interviews for it. But because decisions about materials are made within the prison, either in mail rooms, by prison guards who are not accountable and maybe corrupt as hell, and many are, or by committees comprised of those who work for the system, bureaucratic, but still no oversight of that, there is significant latitude in interpreting these policies, and bureaucracies often exist to fuck people over with the air of legitimacy anyways. We've seen this in prison censorship cases in states like Ohio and New Hampshire, as well as in Washington State. Washington State, by the way, typically a blue state, sometimes purplish, was one of the worst states for prison censorship until they lost a series of lawsuits that forced them to do better. New Hampshire tends to be blue. Ohio tends to be blue. These states terrible prison censorship, they tend blue. In fact, most of the worst cases of censorship are from the blue states. There's only a couple red states that are really bad, and they're all in the southeast part of the country. Whereas Texas actually was surprisingly. There's a story about Texas working to help an author write a book for a prison population, although the book got banned anyways, but then they got the ban lifted, which is rare. So, still bad, but when Texas does better than Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Washington and Ohio, you know it's not a red-blue issue. Where it became clear that scanning for single words without context, often by AIs, by the way, they talk about that later, led to the, and you know AIs do hallucinations and aren't always accurate, led to removal of material with no rhyme or reason, despite claims that it was because of contraband being smuggled in the books. Right. Claims, air quote. I mean, that can happen, but that should have nothing to do with the words in the books. That latitude thrives in the prison system. Operating as a hierarchy means that censorship can happen across many arenas without communication between and among individuals within a given prison, and even more so on a state level, despite statewide policies meant to be uniform. So different prisons do things different ways, different sub-departments of a prison do things different ways. People just you get, sadists who just enjoy, and psychopaths enjoy exercising power over others, who end up in the prison guard profession. I mean, this is something you even see in movies. This has been understood for a long time, but there's been documentaries. It's very much art reflecting life in that case. Penn notes that content-based censorship often occurs in the prison mailroom or in the prison library on the individual level. It gets to the library, where surprisingly the librarians help go along with this, probably because ones who are resistant get fired. In the prison mailroom, individual officers are empowered to decide whether a book will be allowed to reach its intended recipient or not. And there aren't formal processes for such decisions. And by the way, if they say not, they just burn a book. It's not like they even return it most of the time, though the return postage it talks about is excessive. They just destroy books arbitrarily with no documentation of why they did it. This is opening the doors for bullying, harassment, abuse of power, and fascism. Decisions don't require explanations or meaningful insight. This means there may be zero documentation as to why or how certain titles were deemed unacceptable, which means they can just lie. They don't have to document it, so they can just lie, and they do. Traeger notes, scumbag pieces of shit working the prison system will just outright lie. Traeger notes that by virtue of the system operating like a system, that's a little bit of circle language, but censorship becomes an ingrained part of the process. But it doesn't need to. Just because censorship thrives in such a system does not mean we need to accept it as another fact of life. More meaningful review mechanisms, and by the way, other countries do this better, so it's not as if we couldn't. More meaningful review mechanisms, more transparent, clearly defined rules over what constitutes grounds to ban a book. And the U.S. has one of the highest recidivism rates in the world for its prison systems. That says something about how poorly it operates. We need to do better. Unless the real purpose is to keep a population suppressed. More consistent application of these rules, a standard review that recognizes and values the literary merit of a challenged book, so recognizes a book can be worth having available, even if it has, say, a depiction of violence. Moby Dick, for instance, depictions of violence. Absolutely a worthwhile book that should be available to prisoners. Training and regulations that explicitly incorporate First Amendment principles. All of these represent steps we should take to help ensure that the urge to censor is not running rampant in our prisons. In addition to individual level censorship, there's institution-wide censorship. As Penn describes, Penn America still, individual prisons may create their own institution-specific rules about which books are allowed. As a result, certain books may be allowed in one prison and banned in another. Why? I mean, if it was a system that actually made sense, that wouldn't be the case usually. Especially with prisons that have similar populations and such. There's also statewide censorship. Penn notes that this is where banned books make a state list, following the removal from individuals or individual institutions. They explain, state departments of correction may have a list of banned books, which often include thousands of banned titles. Such lists often codify and formalize, so giving the false air of legitimacy to where essentially illegitimate bans that aren't open to public scrutiny. Such lists often codify and formalize the practice is of prison mailrooms towards certain books, turning institution-wide norms into automatic statewide bans. It's at the state level where states like Arizona, Florida, and Illinois, blue state by the way, among others, have developed such lengthy lists of banned books. And this can include banning things people don't like because, they're politically left-wing and it's a right-wing guard. You can see, and then it makes its way into the state lists. And that's like a known issue in Florida, for instance. These banned book lists are not made public, except for in a small number of states. Almost none. The list is like 2 states. Those states, it talks about it later. So it's saying a small number. Small number is 2, if I remember correctly, maybe 3 out of 50. Those states don't make them readily available, though, requiring Freedom of Information Act requests to acquire them. So it's not like you can go online or something. You have to file a form that comes with a fee just to get the list, and then they'll usually tell you that they don't have a list or they're not making one publicly available regardless, and half the stuff can be blacked out. What FOIA request might include, though, is anyone's guess, and updates to lists that do exist aren't necessarily made public or accessible either. Organizations working on behalf of incarcerated populations, and not to mention the general public, including loved ones of those who are incarcerated, if they have people on that side who are going to help them, are left in the dark as to what books are allowed and which aren't. It's quite likely that despite how much information has been requested and collected by advocacy groups. Either way, I want to quickly sort of side that came to mind here. I'm a socialist. I'm also a Christian. It's in the Bible. By the way, these don't go against each other. I do dislike how militant atheists have tried to take over Marxist movements. Marx had issues with religion, but that was because of his personal story. It was because his parents were forced to convert from Judaism to Catholicism. He was resentful of religion. He witnessed some very right-wing Catholic priests who were feeding into racism and anti-Semitism and stuff in Germany, 1800s, and he just developed an overly broad view that unfortunately Lenin copied, and most socialists are Marxist-Leninists. I'm not. I'm a democratic socialist. I think Lenin was wrong about the idea that socialists need to merge into a single party. That's how you get a single party state. That's how you get authoritarianism. But as I mention all this, it's in the Bible. I came to prison. I was in prison and you visit me. Jesus is doing this thing where he's like, I was poor and you fed me. I was without clothes and you gave me clothes upon my back. I was sick and you visit me. I was in prison and you visit me. These are things. The Beatitudes, if I remember correctly. No, the Beatitudes is something else. That's the meek shall inherit the earth. He's saying though, who shall inherit the kingdom of heaven is the sub passages, and he's saying basically people who don't care about the marginalized and oppressed, they're going to hell. That's what Jesus says. He says that, the people who will be called sons of God, they'll be the people who visit the prisoners. He specifically names that population. Do people visit prisoners in the U.S.? No. We lock them away and try and forget about them. Do we take care of the sick? No. I'm disabled. No one ever has come to, there's no social service organizations that come to check on me. There's no efforts to make it so that I can really keep a roof over my head. There's decade-long waiting lists for stuff. There's programs, but they don't have the resources. We don't care for the sick. We don't care for the incarcerated. We don't care for the poor. We're a very unchristian country in how we act, even though Christianity is very prevalent in politics, because right-wingers have hijacked Christianity in the United States. Anyways, part of what you might call the Christian left. Any good Christian should be a socialist. I'm going to repeat that. Any good Christian should be a socialist. That is, and if more were, then they could take over some of the socialist movements from these militant atheists and make them more marginal, because they should be, because atheists should not be so militant and aggressive about it to the point of trying to exclude people of faith or make them feel bad about it. Lenin said some things that were entirely bad and wrong about religion and socialism, and about the need for a single unified party. And these things haven't been challenged enough. And when you do challenge them, you get called a revisionist. And this is why I don't even identify as Marxist-Leninist, just a Marxist, because I don't need these, oh, you're a revisionist. No, it's not. It's okay to revise theories of the past when they were wrong. Too many Marxists want to say we're scientific socialists. Okay, if you're scientific, the scientific process involves revision of inaccurate theories, not holding up theories that have been proven to have problems with them, and perfect your theories. That's what it's supposed to be about. Anyways, organizations that work in behalf of incarcerated populations, not to mention general public, are left in the darkest of what books are allowed and which aren't. It's quite likely, despite how much information has been requested and collected by advocacy groups, there are even steeper realities of censorship in American prisons, of which we're completely unaware. A lack of documentation, oversight, and procedures further hinder the First Amendment rights of those behind bars. The Human Rights Defense Center has tracked state-by-state policies. According to their records, as of writing in 2019, only 2 states, yeah, I was right, it was 2 states, have their banned books lists available online, Pennsylvania and Washington State. In Washington, only if they lost a slew of lawsuits about their extreme censorship. Pennsylvania is the only one that, probably the only blue state that has decent stances in how they run their prison system, which actually probably goes back to the founding of the state, where, whatever Penn, I forget his name, he was big on prison reform. That was literally the founder of the state of Pennsylvania, so it's part of their legacy, and they probably have one of the better run prison systems in the country as a result. Pennsylvania updates their lists quarterly. Doesn't mean it's perfect, just it's less shitty than the rest of the country. In fact, it's still pretty shitty. And Washington is noted that there's, quote, frequently. That's not regular. That's not useful. The work done by the Human Rights Defense Center, particularly through their legal actions, they had to sue Washington State a bunch of times, as well as various prison book groups and advocates, has forced some states to become more transparent about their policies. They're particularly talking about Washington State. Prison book programs are better networked and can share information about suspected restrictions, because it's kept and people are in the dark on what's actually banned. And we have more people are interested, which makes the organizations even send books that aren't banned because they don't know what's banned or not. We have more people who are interested in prison advocacy in general. Digital portals and email have made public record requests easier than the days of physically mailing letters back and forth, which they claim they don't get. In fact, I have issues with stability agent stuff with agencies with keep saying they send me letters and I don't physically get the letters, and they won't send anything electronically, and their portal doesn't ever have anything. This is a game they play. They're almost certainly not actually mailing stuff and then just lying about it. So you have better access to these banned books lists, says DeLon. She notes that states like Colorado and Washington have made changes to their own policies in the wake of litigation. An ACLU-led lawsuit in 2000 reached a settlement in 2004 in Colorado, which led to more open records about the scope of prison censorship. That's just letting people know what's being censored, which should be a given in any democratic society. While DeLon notes that Washington is responsive, particularly to prison book advocates, because they have been sued into oblivion by the Human Rights Defense Center. Yeah, they lost a whole bunch of lawsuits all at one time. Cost the state a lot of money, forced them to change. A complete list of HRDC-led litigation and the manner of prison censorship gives some insights into where, why, and how some states are less opaque in their policies and processes. In this complete list, you can see all the filings. There were 41 filings in Washington. Pennsylvania, only 5. That's below average. Hawaii, 3. Texas, 18. It's a big state. Texas, one of the better ones. New Mexico, 16 for their population. That's a lot. Arizona, 19. They're more populous. Illinois, 13. Surprisingly low given how bad it is there, as is Michigan. Virginia, 12. Vermont, 14 filings. This must correlate to some degree just how much the populace has supported these filings, because Vermont is a very left-wing state. Like, there's probably a higher density of socialists in the state of Vermont than any other state in the Union. Such is not the case in other states. Alaska's Department of Corrections required $2,000 that for access to prison book bans logs when requested by the HRDC, with similar charges requested by Kentucky and Idaho. Alabama requires $25, much more reasonable fee, but still a fee, for any public records request sent to the Department of Corrections, meaning it costs $25 to be told they probably don't have them. So they don't make their records available, pay the fee, and then get told that there are no records can be provided. As the law notes, they had to be persuaded not to charge another $25 for a follow-up explanation just to elaborate on why they don't have things. New Mexico, like many states with little oversight into their processes, regularly misunderstands or intentionally pretending to misunderstand information requests, sending organizations like the HRDC into a nonstop email chain with no answers to initial inquiries. When books are banned, there's no precedent for how review occurs, where one requests. New Mexico is basically bureaucratized and used bureaucrats to stonewall people. The U.S. Supreme Court has said that prisons must have an appeals process wherein the original reviewer isn't part of the final decision, but as Penn notes, there is no requirement that this reviewer be independent of the prison system, nor are there any other meaningful criteria regarding the reviewer's qualifications. So it can just be another guard in a prison. They don't have to be qualified to make these decisions. The result could be anyone. A secretary, doesn't matter. The result is a review system that fails to operate as a serious check on prison censorship. And further, with the power in the hands of the states, there are additional complications when it comes to record maintenance. Public record laws, being state-based, are often very weak, and so it's difficult to get, in general, to get information from a state because of the general culture of policing prisons, which creates an us and them, and prison advocates, us and them, in-group, out-group thinking, basis of xenophobia, by the way. Prison advocates may be seen as opposition trying to undermine prisons and the livelihood of staff, or to criticize them, as if criticism was always unjustified. It's a defensive position. Or maybe because there's no national requirement for data collection, especially on this issue, so a lot of prison systems are genuinely at a loss how to respond to requests for non-existent data system. Yeah, that's giving them too much leeway. They're in bad faith. I'm sorry, but a lot of these bureaucracies, these organizations are authoritarian and they act in bad faith. Authorized distribution of books in prisons. Another challenge is, and ironically, there's some else would probably be like, oh, you think the system isn't just authoritarian, you should go to prison or something. So people talking about the system as evil and oppressive should be oppressed, so they won't think that. That's not how it works. They just become more hardened in that belief because they see it firsthand. Anyways, authorized distribution of books in prisons. Another challenge is the means by which books are allowed to reach the incarcerated. Penn calls these, quote, content-neutral bans and defines them as often implemented as part of a, quote, secure vendor program, by which the prisons allow incarcerated people to purchase packages only from certain pre-approved vendors, and usually very short lists of vendors, which greatly restricts access to books because the vendors only carry books made in their publishing house. Because these restrictions are not based on the content of certain books, but instead aimed at restricting books as packages, which is why they're called, quote, content neutral. These Penn states are actually far more damaging than the blanket book bans. Well, for one, because it's hard to get them overturned. A letter published in Dear Books to Prisoners from Books to Prisoners, Demetrius shows what books have meant to him while incarcerated, with a poll quote on the left reading, sometimes I feel without the books I receive, I might go crazy. Yep, and many people do with long periods of solitary confinement, with guard abuse. There's been a number of documentaries on this. I've watched some of them. With content-neutral bans, as seen with banned books list, information varies state by state. They include forcing incarcerated individuals to pay for books directly. Right. So no organizations can send them the books, even though the prisoners have very limited economic means and are part of oppressed groups. A huge number of them, by the way, disabled. A lot of disabled people end up in prisons. They weren't able to work. Disability is a joke. It gets paused when they go to prison anyways. And so they have almost no money, and then no one's allowed to send them books. They have to pay for it directly. It's an excuse just to, their set of rules make sure that poor people can't get books in prison. Being unable to receive books in the mail from friends and family. It goes along with that. Although this is a little more specific because that doesn't necessarily ban nonprofits from sending them. The first does. Rely on third-party organizations like Books to Prisoners and Books Through Bars to supply books. So some states won't allow third parties to send prisoners books, and other states will only allow. This is how inconsistent the system is. Permitting, it's not a database, it's just based on vibes, essentially. People say, oh, the people in charge, they know what they're doing. No, they fucking don't. Most of the time, they just do shit by vibes or feels or their political ideology, not based on data and facts. Permitting the incarcerated to only purchase books from specific vendors, which gives vendors a monopoly, and they're overcharging, and then kicking back money to officials. There's obviously kickbacks and bribery involved, an opportunity to overcharge for their materials, bribing for one not to approve additional vendors and allow competition. Content neutral, which is something even right wingers should dislike. Content, because competition, basis of markets. Content neutral book banning policies. Competition is the basis of any market, even a market socialist system. Anyways, content neutral book banning policies are becoming more and more restrictive. It seems like every few months we find out another policy has been quietly rolled out somewhere in the country. So the pace of oppression outstrips our ability to understand it, to comprehend it. That's a quote from Andor. It fits what's going on in the country right now, which there's this whole subplot in Andor where one of the main characters gets unjustly thrown in prison. He sees how the Empire is horribly oppressing prisoners there. This is part of what got me wanting to do videos about this particular issue from watching Andor. Because it rhymed with what's actually going on in our country. And I already was somewhat aware of this. I'm like, shit, this is how fascists gain power and keep power, and this needs to be talked about. It seems like every few months we find another policy has been quietly rolled out somewhere in the country, says Traeger, like it was in Andor, where the public order resentencing directive is a thing, and it's just quietly rolled out. People don't even know what happened for the most part, except some politicians. Each state determines as an appropriate vendor, indeed, sometimes makes little sense at all. In some states, such as Indiana, Maine, Massachusetts, very blue state, Michigan, blue state, Minnesota, Mississippi, Nebraska, New Hampshire, blue state, New Jersey, blue state, New York, blue state, and we'll point out this is not a red-blue issue. In fact, the blue states are often the worst offenders. These lists don't really talk about degrees of how badly they offend. North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, blue state, Pennsylvania, blue state, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, blue state, Virginia, purple leans blue state, Washington, blue state, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Set up one of the requirements. In some states, they set up one of the requirements, in some cases, a sole allowance, books to be sent from the publisher. A number of the combines with all these other restrictions to make getting books actually effectively impossible. A number of the previously listed states, along with a handful of others, include, quote, bookstores, quote, approved vendor, and quote, book distributors among the restrictions. So not letting people get, or only letting, it's that the restrictions are wildly inconsistent. Some will only let people get books in bookstores, some people won't let bookstores at all. It's intentionally a patchwork so people can't understand it, can't fight back against the oppression. Some states, like Louisiana, will each facility determine from whom books may receive. Though in Louisiana, family are not approved. Blanket ban on family. Jackie Snow, volunteer with DC's Books to Prisoners program, which has been in operation since 1999 and sends nearly 6,000 packages a year to people in prisons across 35 states. 99, 98, that's an inflection point when the country really started to slip fascist. People don't realize it started way earlier than we think. Actually, the former Bush administration official talks about in 98 when they set up these secret committees in 1998. Or was it 6? I think she said maybe they started the groundwork in 96, but in 98 they got them established to secretly divert money from where it's budgeted to other things in a completely hidden process that there's certain like congressmen who have oversight over this secretly, but the public has no ability to see where the money's being spent. She talked about this again. This lady went on Tucker Carlson. She went on left wing things. She's a right winger, but even she recognizes this is dangerous and fascist. Sends nearly 6,000 packages a year to people in prisons across 35 states. Notes that these vendor limitations are one of the biggest emerging censorship issues. We're seeing more prisons try to do tablets. By the way, prison book ban week. Free prison tablets aren't actually free. So, go back and touch on that issue later. See more prisons try to do tablets or restrict to certain vendors, prove vendors who very limited lists, and might get some sort of financial incentive for each sale. Profit, price gouging. A lot of the stated concern is about contraband being smuggled via books. That's the reason they claim they're doing it this way. That's often a lie or cover or based on very, very rare stories of something going wrong to justify blanket bans, as if it's right. People forget for every one time something goes wrong, there's a million times it doesn't. So you can't make rules reactionary about very rare things. It does more harm than good. Our group goes out of the way not to sell any books that prisons worry about, like books with water damage, which could be dissolved drugs, or any colored books with pages already colored in, which is also a way drugs have been smuggled in. By the way, the criminalization of drugs is part of why it's happened in the first place. Drugs should not be illegal. Should not be. They should be treated as a disease because they are, and help offered to those people. But making it illegal just contributes to, say, censorship, because now they're banning books because people might be smuggling drugs for them. If the drugs were just legal and the prisoners were given medical help and counseling and therapy and strongly discouraged from using but not had it legal, then they wouldn't have to worry about people dissolving drugs in water damage on books. And thus, that couldn't be used as justification for censorship. It all ties together. The so-called war on drugs, the so-called war on terror, which is leading to mass surveillance, and military surplus from excessive military spending being given to police departments. The so-called war on crime, it's all a bunch of bullshit. It all feeds into itself. It's all how fascism is developing in America. More prisons are restricting the books we can send to only being in new condition, which makes the work a lot harder since most donations are not brand new books. People drop off used books, like donation boxes, to send to prisoners. Being in DC doesn't help. They're in DC, since most of these issues are decided at state level, and DC doesn't have statehood. Yet another issue, and all the oppression it networks together. One layer of oppression feeds another. Requiring a book come from the publisher is a significant hurdle for prisoners and approaches some materials over others. In some states, it's made more difficult with language that doesn't distinguish what publishers, also language barriers, by the way, is a thing that comes in there as well. It's worth knowing. With language, it doesn't distinguish what publishers are allowed to send materials and which aren't. It's a huge obstacle for people incarcerated and limits their access to a full range of reading materials. There is also a big component of the litigation by the Human Rights Defense Center. This is also a big component, since so many prisons have an inclination to disbelieve that a publisher is actually a publisher. Think of all the tiny publishing houses out there and will falsely reject books because of this rule. So they're actually publishers. They claim they're not publishers. They don't bother to do any research on it. B, not understand that many publishers don't necessarily sell directly. Many just don't. They're too small for that, but may sell books to bookstores who then provide books from a central distribution hub. Think Amazon, explains Nolan. Right adds, the reality is it deprives friends and families the ability to share books, and to the extent prisoners are overwhelmingly poor because of systematic oppression in the United States, and their families are as well, imposes additional barriers to access books and information. In fact, it could be argued the reason we have crime is because poverty. Poverty is because of capitalism. So basically, this is just another aspect of the capitalist oppressive state. We keep people poor, crime happens, then we lock people up. We limit their access to books. It's part of how you control the population. The corollary to this is that policies that ban used books, even if they come from book vendors or sellers. So even book sellers, vendors, can't sell used books, which is ridiculous. New Hampshire's policy for books to prisoners, for example, notes that materials may be introduced in the mail by a bona fide publisher or bona fide bookstore and prepaid by direct subscription only. The policy does not note what bona fide means when it comes to a publisher to a bookstore, giving them leeway to just do whatever the fuck they want, and what they want is often cruel, evil, and oppressive. In 2018, New York's limitation of books from publishers brought light to how restricted these policies and relationships can be. New York State's effort to restrict access to books in prisons shows troubling disregard for right to read. It's another thing, and this is going too long, so I'm going to have to push this article. Maybe I'll do another video. The approved list of publishers includes only 6 options. It's more in some states, but yeah. A state as big as New York, they could have done better. The policy was and there's a lot of publishing houses in New York City, which is probably why this got overturned, because of economic interest. The policy was overturned in part because of significant media attention in New York City, I would bet you, and the work of advocacy groups like Books Through Bars New York City. Michigan's current policies for books to prisoners are among some of the most restrictive and most challenging to shift. It's the most challenging to figure out what's actually going on. No used books are allowed, and new books must be purchased through one of 3 vendors approved by the state. These vendors include Edward R. Hamilton Bookseller, I never even heard of them, Prison Legal News, Human Rights Defense Center, HRDC, maybe in good faith, but they're probably overwhelmed, and Schulter Books and Music. Again, never heard of them, so that's not even like a long list of sellers with popular big ones. You don't see like Penguin Books or any of the huge ones. Additionally, those with visual impairments are allowed materials from the National Library of Congress, Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, and American Printing House for the Blind. And those seeking certain non-used religious publications have a list of approved vendors as well. The HRDC is currently pursuing legal action against the Michigan Department of Corrections for its censorship to the incarcerated. And for good fucking reason. I was seen in Ohio earlier this year. These pre-approved lists of vendors can lead to more questions about the nation, it should say the nature of the relationships between the institutions and the vendor, because it's kickbacks, bribery. If a vendor has a monopoly, they can increase the prices of materials and then use those increased profits to do kickbacks to the already vulnerable populations who likely could not afford the book. In fact, often could not afford it at normal prices, which is why nonprofits should be able to send books for free or for a very low price. Public outcry has been beneficial in these censorship cases, as has been seen in places like Washington State. It's heartening because the public got aware with all the lawsuits there of what was going on, and there was protests in support of books for prisoners. It's heartening that many of these policies are scrapped or revised after public outcries trigger, but unfortunately the policies keep getting added to the list faster than people can get them repealed. The pace of repression outstrips our ability to comprehend it. This is creeping fascism. But we cannot have public outrage as our most effective means of oversight. We need systemic change to address a systemic problem. Correct. I personally do believe the advocates are being more vocal about this issue, but we have to remember that there is little public visibility into this. There is zero doubt that there are many more instances of arbitrary or irrational book banning in our prisons, of which we are woefully unaware yet. What are prisoners allowed to have? Restrictions on material quantity and types. As a result of the lack of transparency about books being banned in prisons, the creators of the censored books are often unaware their books have been restricted, so they can't even advocate for their books to be lifted because they don't even know, because it's kept secret. That's part of why it's kept secret, so people can't fight back against the injustice. Authors who write books for this population, hoping to offer them guidance, insight, education, hope, frequently do not know their titles have been withheld unless they seek out the banned books lists by state. And I've already seen how some states want to charge thousands of dollars for those lists. Others just do shit like New Mexico does, where they just pretend to misunderstand the request. Even then, with documentation inconsistent and frequently out of date, I would bet Massachusetts, with its excessive bureaucracy, probably does something similar in New Mexico. Even then, with documentation inconsistent, frequently out of date, the reality of the situation can be unknown. Terry Leclerc, the author of Prison Grievances, which was banned in Kansas and Illinois until intervention, finds her book still unavailable in other state institutions. Written for those experiencing incarceration, Leclerc worked with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice while writing her book over the course of 10 years. So it's a long time for a book. She worked with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And of course, even then, Kansas and Illinois are more reactionary. They're more right-wing than Texas here on this issue. Illinois is a blue state. Doesn't matter. Very corrupt blue state. After staff in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice received my early draft and made very helpful suggestions, no censor at all, so they weren't censoring it, I finally, 10 years from beginning to publication, got it self-published and ready for sale. This is the author talking. A lawyer friend here offered to buy a copy for each Texas Department of Corrections unit. The first book I sent to a correspondent was banned. I learned that because he said he didn't get it. He checked the mailroom and they said it was on the banned list, so they destroyed it, she said, noting that destroying this instance meant the book disappeared altogether without explanation. It was not returned to her, And when she followed up, the mailroom reached out to the incarcerated correspondent asking if he could afford the postage to return it to sender. No one can, of course, Albuquerque. Not the prices they charge. This is referenced somewhere else. Maybe one of these other articles. Probably did too much, pulled up too many articles for this story. I definitely would have to do a follow-up later. If anyone watches this, YouTube will probably try and censor and restrict the number of people who even see this video. Having a 10-year project written directly for the very audience that was not allowed to get it was a tremendous blow. I had ups and downs in the project, but this was the bottom of hell. Her awareness of the situation and her investment in helping those who are incarcerated know their rights has led to further work on prison censorship. With the help of a student assistant, I guess she's an academic, she pulled together a state-by-state list of the quantity and quality of books prisoners allowed and where those books may be acquired. Here's a hell of a list. All 50 states, Alabama prisoners are allowed to receive only 2 books per month. Alaska prisoners are allowed 5 at a time, only new books. This one stood out. Hawaii, books, magazines, films, X may not be sent to an inmate. So Hawaii doesn't allow any books, to prisoners. Fuck Hawaii. Massachusetts, publications, not very boosted. Publications must be sent directly from the publisher, book club, bookstore, or through prison books program. Except it's probably bureaucratized. The point's unusable, knowing Massachusetts. Michigan, publications must be new and sent through approved internet vendor or publisher. Some places don't allow internet vendors. Michigan only allows internet vendors. See the problem? Montana, books must be soft covers. Some states will allow hard covers. Limited books depends on prisoner classification. New York, publications to be sent through publisher. That's vague intentionally. New Mexico, soft cover books only. 3 books, 3 magazines, 2 religious books per what? North Dakota, no used or previously read materials be allowed to be sent. Already covered that. It's a problem. Oregon, publications must be sent directly from publisher or distributor. Washington, publications must be sent through publisher. Only new paperback books. Wisconsin, on the other hand, prisoners are allowed up to 25 publications at a time. That's a good thing. Wisconsin has a, much more reasonable, maybe even excessively lax set of rules. 20, or 15 would probably be, well, let's see, I've had some 9-book series. If they're allowed their own little library, which bookshelves, that's literally a thing in some prisons. I've played Prison Architect, the game. You can give prisoners their own little bookshelves. That's the thing in some prisons. You even see it like The Green Mile, I think it was. A movie about someone in prison. Or was it, I've watched a couple of movies about this kind of thing. Or was it Shawshank Redemption? Anyways, books large in Virginia, books large in 11 inches by 14 not allowed. What? That's tiny. Publications must be sent through a publisher. Utah, books may only be purchased through prison commissary. Texas, must be sent through publisher, limited to space prisoner has, and they probably crowd them like hell. Rhode Island, all book packages must be delivered by USPS. Only new paperback books. Pennsylvania, publications to be sent through publisher. See, it's a huge patchwork. It's wildly inconsistent. You get shit like Hawaii not allowing anything. Well, all of those who are incarcerated have access to law library. Most also have access to some capacity to leisure library. The fact that's not all is a problem. You want people distracted so they're not freaking turning to violence while they're in there. The point of prison is to keep people separate aside. People that go, it's point is punishment. Yeah, that doesn't work. It's just freaking sadists who want to cause human suffering. And probably would have done the same thing with that person's shoes if they grew up in the same education system or they suffered the same kind of oppression. If they were homeless, again, the disability to homeless to prison pipeline. But the extent of those libraries, as Penn reports, varied and inconsistent. The American Library Association has a recommended set, and also literary books like Moby Dick, that literary value and helps develop people's minds. Just because it's not a law book doesn't mean people shouldn't be reading it. The American Library Association has a recommended set of standards for adult correctional institutions. They suggest a minimum of 15 books per person in the libraries, or at least 5,000 titles for smaller institutions. In 2000, U.S. prisons libraries held only 7 books per prisoner, according to one estimate. Since then, with the dramatic increase in mass incarceration over the past 2 decades, it is widely understood that prison library book acquisitions have fallen even further behind the standards. It's probably down to like 3 books a prisoner, or 4, although comprehensive data is unavailable. And also because they haven't even kept up with replacing. These books get worn out. And you'll see if we get to it, how Illinois put less than $10 per prison in 1 year. That's not enough to replace anything. The report continues outlining the realities of prison library funding. Prison librarians, like any other librarians in other resource locations, might find themselves quote, hustling for book donations to sufficiently stock their shelves. Meanwhile, this is supposed to be a source. Came from something, it was miscopied anyways. Meanwhile, funds for prison libraries are often the first to go when state officials cut budgets. In Illinois, for example, an Illinois newsroom investigation found that in 2017, this pauper governor, some middle-class assholes loved him because, oh, we balanced the budget. He did it by cutting the heart out of things that poorer people need. And the Illinois Department of Corrections spent a total of $276 on new books. For a system with 28 facilities, that's less than $10 per prison. That's not enough to even replace attrition. The state never lets to keep up with new books coming out to allow people to, to find things that might be more suitable for people to read, that might actually enlighten them, educate them, give them hope, to, deal with the variety of different populations they have in there at different education levels. Some people can barely read, others have, higher education behind them. The state of Maryland has approximately 129,000 books in its libraries, approximately 7 books per incarcerated person, which was the nationwide average in the past. Probably a bit above average now. The state spends approximately $16,000 per year for new books for an incarcerated population of more than 17,000 people, so less than $1 per person a year. In Georgia, so it's not even that expensive to do better. In Georgia, investigation, they managed to be above average with less than $1 per person per year. In Georgia, investigation this year by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution analyzed the book catalogs at 12 state prisons. Among their findings, 4 prisons had less than 4 books per person, with the prison library at one prison offering fewer than 2,000 books for approximately 1,000 prisoners, so less than 2 a person. And very small numbers, so there's less diversity in the books, period. It's not just a matter of how many copies of each book, but very few types of books. Even within these poorly funded, understaffed libraries, the reality is even starker. The books on shelves do not reflect those who are incarcerated. As Penn notes from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution conducted the report, although nearly 2/3 of Georgia inmates are black, more than half of the libraries have no books on Martin Luther King Jr., and 2/3 of them don't have anything on Malcolm X, who was, murdered by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department in a naked case of fascism in America back in the day. No, that's Fred Hampton. Sorry. My mistake. I'm mixing up names. I'm not trying to say some conspiracy thing about Malcolm X. I'm mixing up Malcolm X and Fred Hampton. Malcolm X was killed by an unknown assailant. Fred Hampton was murdered by the Chicago Police Department FBI in a very well documented case of police brutality. They went in guns blazing. There was one bullet fired back from a guy who was just watching the door with a shotgun who was shot. He died, and his hand pulled the trigger. And by the way, this was a no-knock raid. There was no reason for it. And it was... And then they shot Fred Hampton while he was in bed sleeping in the head. Yeah, freaking fascists. And they shot him like 13 times. And prison librarians, despite their own best intentions, can become part of the system as well. Will Clark found this to be the case when her book was finally allowed in Texas facilities. Following a meeting and discussion with Texas Senator John Whitmer, who she notes is one of the few senators working on prison legislation, it's good that he does, because he's true to his principles, Republican or not, Will Clark's book was reinstated. The next Monday, the head of the Texas Department of Corrections called and told me he had given approval for the book to be placed in the general libraries. It was placed in general libraries. Although, in crazy turn of events, some of the librarians seem to place it on bottom shelves, unlisted. It's not in the catalogs, make it hard for people to find. Some unit libraries then decided readers could only use it for 15 minutes. It's a fifth grade graphic novel, but who could absorb all that legal information in 15 minutes? Not me, for sure, and I read rather fast. It's as if the prison culture has pervaded even the people who are supposed to help inmates, like librarians. You think? Authors can do nothing. Zip. Zero. We can't learn which prisons have banned us. This hidden and nefarious censorship will continue and will grow. Note, this is getting worse, not better, like everything in America, says Clark. The quantity of material each individual is allowed to have while incarcerated is not only limited by financial realities, a huge problem, especially people say disabled, poor, imposed by forcing them to purchase materials through outside vendors, but they're limited to and the format of books. Hardcovers are more expensive than paperbacks, and some prisons require hardcovers instead of paperbacks. New books more costly in use, for sure. Even for me, buying new actual physical books can be a strain on my budget. Further still, the restriction to and I'm not a prisoner. Further still, the restriction to a certain number of books. I mean, I couldn't do this if I was, because they wouldn't definitely not allow access to a laptop. They do not want people speaking out or railing against their injustice. Further still, the restriction to a certain number of books per person in conjunction with, and certainly not to streaming software and internet. The restriction to a certain number of books per person in conjunction with underfunded and poorly developed prison libraries only hinders their First Amendment rights more deeply. We should be way beyond this. We should have books galore, and we should be talking about trying to allow internet access to prisoners in at least controlled manners. The fact of the freaking matter is the system is oppressive. The system tries to make it so people can't integrate into society. And it's not like there aren't models of this. Like in, you go to Finland or something, they've got internet for the prisoners. Here, they don't even have books. It's oppression. It's evil. It's fascism. The beginnings of it's the seed of it. I'm not saying we're in a fascist state now, but we're getting that way. This is how it starts. The prisoners are the canary in the coal mine. Advocacy groups like Books to Prisoners, Books Behind Bars, and others all serve a crucial role in getting books in the hands of those incarcerated. But in addition to inconsistent policies and book bans, which happen without clear reasoning or process, the fact that many state policies disallow used books to get into the hands of individuals is a challenge. Michigan is one of the states that does not allow any used books into their facilities, either for individuals in the system or the libraries. As noted previously, the restriction to only 3 vendors for purchasing titles has meant that not only are prison book donation groups not active in the state, but that HRDC has stepped in to sue the state over prison censorship. State policies remain vague here, too. North Dakota disallows books that have been, quote, previously read as something separate from used, while New Mexico sets a hard limit on the number of books, magazines, and religious texts. What separates a book from a religious text in this case, and or restrictions, is that placed on certain religious faiths. It's asking you to think about that. Like, it's as often used to censor certain faiths. The ability to leave these up for interpretation gives significant opportunity for overreach and corruption, by the way, on the part of the wardens or those they assign responsibility to, like corrupt prison guards, as has been seen before and will continue to be seen in the future. And for advocacy groups and prison book donation organizations, the ever-shifting policies are compounded by the fact that each group is often treated differently by the same facilities. We're all volunteers with full-time jobs and other obligations. In the past, various book programs have tried to create centralized lists of known restrictions at prisons, but we just end up with more confusion because it turns out that every prison treats every group differently. One group might be accepted at prison, another group might be restricted to new books only, another group might be fully banned. At many states like New Mexico and both Washington and Ohio until recently, every warden was given latitude to make their own rules. A new warden would mean a new set of rules, but of course we weren't generally privy to either regime changes or policy updates. It's a mess, and that's where I'll find to get better standards and oversight so we don't have to waste time, energy, and postage money to find out the prison has changed its rules yet again, says DeLon. What can be done? Shit, this has gone too long. And this is going to be milquetoast nonsense. What can be done is radical political change. It's an end to capitalism. It's an end to two-party system. People want to get very deep into specific issues, but if you all about this one censorship issue, you miss the 50 other things that are going in the background. Still, I'll read a little into this. I put together a list of books I wanted and wrote letters to hundreds of organizations and famous people I read about in magazines asking if they would donate one of these books to the Patuxent Library. Can you imagine how special that was to have the library get a new book and realize it was one I asked for and that someone donated because of me? Chris Wilson, former incarcerated author. I didn't just live for that library, I lived because of that library. The Patuxent Prison Library saved me from crushing despair. It saved hundreds of other guys, too. Because of better tools, communication, connection, and time, awareness of the depths of prison censorship is growing. That means that thanks to work of advocacy groups, outrage is not going to solve this. Ongoing legal challenges, or reports like those done by, of course, now you get like the Trump administration, they don't give a shit. They ignore legal challenges. They ignore judges ruling against them half the time. Reports like those done by Penn and similar groups and individuals, more information exists. Yeah, that's not going to fix things. And this information means the average citizen can get a better handle on how they can act and stand up for the rights of those experiencing incarceration. That's not an answer of what people can do. In my capacity with Books to Prisoners, we do this work for several reasons. Many of us are librarians, bookstore employees, and other pro-book people. We want to see the joy of reading spread as far as possible, as do I. We also do this because especially, and they're censoring things like, say, books on socialism. That's absolutely getting banned because political freedom doesn't really exist in the United States. It's a lie. It's a facade. It's a farce. Just suppressive as the regime's North Korean shit that we freaking demonize. I mean, they ban books on capitalism and books ban books on socialism. How is it different? There's a lot of nonsense of people pushing trains and such. That's a lie. They're not a good system. My point is we're not a good system either. We're just blind to our own failings. Maybe it's a little bit of exaggeration, but they're a poor country, so things are going to be worse there too. We ask this because, especially as we work with these groups longer, we see the profound isolation and deprivation experienced by people in prisons. Also, isolation, problem for countries. Cut countries off from trade, like Cuba and North Korea, and they become poor, and then we blame their economic systems when it's really because of our sanctions. And deprivation experienced by people in prisons who want to remedy that even this very small way. There are a variety of perspectives in books to prisoner programs. And those who want to see this as prisoner support and abolition work, i.e., defunding reform of the police, that absolutely needs to happen. To those who operate with the framework of rehabilitation, want to see prisoners gain access to tools for job training and higher education. How are they going to afford higher education in prison in order to better themselves and decrease recidivism, says Dawn. She notes that the most commonly requested books include dictionaries, Spanish language learning. That one's simple enough. Learn Spanish. It's a common, you may have to work with people who speak Spanish, so yeah, that helps. Black history and fiction, how to draw, or writing, art skills, manga and comics, if you have the aptitude anyways, the ability to learn it. Vocational training, including plumbing, as well as how to start a business. Genre fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, thrillers, and horror in particular. Ancient history, mythology, occult, legal self-help, and games. Sudoku, crosswords, Dungeons and Dragons. That's one's surprising. What's the average person to do? In what ways then the work continue to push forward? They could have prisoners do D&D games. They won't. But that would be some way to normalize the experience and help them less likely to turn to criminality behind bars. They want people to donate time, money, be a voice. Yeah. This video's gone too long. I'll have to return to this later. Maybe a what is to be done video. I need to do more of those, but honestly, I don't buy into this milquetoast, liberal shit, radical reform in the system. If you don't change the economic basis of inequality, you're not going to end depression, because depression is funded by billionaires, and they have way more money, time, and resources than you do. Well, not time personally, but the higher people have time. Our only solution can come from changing the system radically, ending the two-party system, proportional representation, ranked choice voting, these referendum laws, these at a minimum. Nothing else will be possible until then. And, socialism, so nationalization of large industries, encouragement and funding of the creation of workers' cooperatives, and after that. But I doubt that'll happen in America, and that is why, if I can legally do so, I want to get the fuck out. But if you're here and you really believe you can change this country, be prepared for one hell of a long fight with heavy resistance, police suppression, groups like the FBI trying to murder you if you become too dangerous to the system. These fuckers do not care about the law, no matter what they say. Well, anyways, I wish you all the best. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves, and may you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Until next time, this is Northstar. I do, and best luck.